What if I told you that the afterlife has been trying to reach you your entire life? That the veil between worlds isn't solid but permeable, constantly sending signals that most people dismiss as coincidence, imagination, or mental disturbance? You've felt it, haven't you? That strange knowing when someone dies before the phone rings. That dream of your grandfather the night he passed 3 states away. That inexplicable pull toward a cemetery you've never visited. That voice in the silence that sounds like someone you lost. They weren't random. They weren't meaningless. They were signals. Messages from beyond the veil that I spent 60 years documenting, studying, and experiencing myself. The medical world calls them hallucinations. The religious world calls them miracles or demons. The skeptical world calls them nonsense. But I called them what they truly are: communications from the collective unconscious, proof that consciousness transcends death, evidence that the afterlife isn't waiting for you somewhere in the future. It's calling to you right now. Today I'm going to share with you the 5 unmistakable signals that the afterlife is reaching across the veil to contact you. These aren't superstitions. These aren't wishful thinking. These are documented phenomena that I witnessed, studied, and experienced throughout my career as a psychiatrist and researcher of the human psyche. And what I discovered will change how you see every strange occurrence, every unexplainable moment, every mysterious feeling you've ever dismissed as impossible. I remember the morning of January 28, 1944, with absolute clarity. I was recovering from a heart attack, confined to my bed, when I saw my physician, Dr. H, standing at the foot of my bed in a peculiar light, almost glowing, wearing an expression I'd never seen on his face before: peaceful, resolved, somehow finished. The vision lasted only moments, but it disturbed me deeply. Not because I saw him, but because of how I saw him. He appeared in his primal form, his archetypal self, as if he'd already become his essential image. The next day I learned that Dr. H had died suddenly during the night I saw him. Not after I saw him, during. At the exact moment my vision occurred, he was leaving his body. He came to say goodbye, not consciously but archetypally. His psyche reached out at the moment of transition and touched mine. This wasn't unique to me. Throughout my 60 years of practice, I documented hundreds, perhaps thousands of cases where people knew of a death before being told. A mother wakes at 3:17 a.m., certain her soldier son has died, only to receive the telegram days later confirming he fell in battle at that exact time. A woman sees her sister standing in her kitchen, smiling, dressed in white, then learns her sister died in a hospital across the country at that moment. A child tells his teacher that grandpa came to say goodbye during recess, and the family gets the call that afternoon. The materialist dismisses these as coincidence. But I spent decades tracking these occurrences, and I found they happen far too frequently, far too precisely, to be random chance. The psyche is not confined to the brain. It extends beyond the body, exists in a dimension where space and time function differently. When someone dies, their consciousness doesn't simply vanish. It moves through this extended psychic field, and those connected to them through love, through blood, through deep soul bonds can sense this movement. If you've ever known someone died before being told, you weren't imagining it. You were receiving signal 1. The afterlife was announcing itself through a consciousness that transcends physical distance, proving that connection survives the body's death. These death announcements aren't supernatural. They're natural functions of the psyche operating at a level most people never access consciously. In 1913, my father died. Our relationship had been complex, strained, unresolved. I carried guilt, anger, questions I would never get to ask him. Then, approximately 6 weeks after his death, he came to me in a dream. Not a memory dream where I was remembering him. A visitation dream where he was present, speaking, interacting with me as if death hadn't happened. I didn't know it would be like this. He told me in the dream. I thought I understood, but I didn't. Now I see. I woke with absolute certainty that I had communicated with my father's consciousness, not merely processed my grief through symbolic imagery. The dream had a different quality than normal dreams. Sharper, more vivid, carrying information I didn't consciously possess, generating emotions that felt externally caused rather than internally generated. Over the following months, he returned repeatedly. Each dream had that same quality of visitation rather than imagination. And I wasn't alone in this experience. Patient after patient reported identical phenomena. A young widow whose husband appeared regularly to comfort her, a man whose deceased mother came with specific messages for his sister, a woman whose stillborn child visited her in dreams, showing her who the child would have become. I developed a way to distinguish these visitation dreams from ordinary dreams processing grief. Visitation dreams have 4 unmistakable characteristics. First, the deceased appears healthy, whole, often younger than when they died. Second, they communicate important information, usually reassurance or unfinished business. Third, the dreamer wakes with absolute conviction it was real contact, not symbolic processing. Fourth, the dream is remembered with unusual clarity for years, even decades, unlike normal dreams that fade. The afterlife uses dreams as its primary communication channel because during sleep, the conscious mind's skepticism is suspended. The rational gatekeepers that would dismiss such contact as impossible step aside, allowing the psyche to receive what it actually perceives. Your deceased loved ones haven't abandoned you. They're visiting you almost every night. You're just not remembering because your waking mind can't accept what your sleeping mind knows. If you've had dreams of deceased loved ones that felt different, realer, more impactful than normal dreams, you weren't fantasizing, you were receiving signal too. The afterlife was reaching through the dream state to prove consciousness continues, to complete unfinished conversations, to deliver messages your waking mind needs, but your ego resists. In 1920, a woman came to my office in Zurich, desperate and grieving. Her husband had died 2 months prior, and she was being driven mad by a single question: where had he hidden the family documents? He told her they were safe, but she couldn't find them anywhere. His business partners needed them urgently. She'd searched every logical place in their home. I listened to her describe her fruitless search, and then, without warning, without any logical basis, I knew. Not thought, not guessed, knew. Check behind the false panel in the second drawer of his desk in the library, I told her. There's a hidden compartment he installed himself. She stared at me. How could you possibly... I don't know, I admitted, but I'm certain. She returned 3 days later, shaken. She'd found the exact panel I described in the exact drawer. The documents were there, along with letters to her he'd never sent. How did you know? She demanded. I didn't know how I knew. But this phenomenon, this impossible knowing, happened to me repeatedly throughout my life. I would know things I had no way of knowing, where lost objects were hidden, what patients were hiding in their histories, what decisions would lead to which outcomes. Information would simply arrive in my consciousness, fully formed, undeniably accurate. And I wasn't unique. I documented this same impossible knowing in hundreds of people. A mother who suddenly knows her daughter needs her and calls at the exact moment of crisis. A man who knows not to board a plane that later crashes. A woman who knows her friend is pregnant before any physical signs appear, before even the friend knows. This knowing comes from what I call the collective unconscious, a dimension of psyche that all humans share, where information exists independent of individual minds, where the living and the dead remain connected through archetypal patterns and psychic resonance. The dead can push information through this collective field into the consciousness of the living, not through words, but through direct knowing. Your gut feelings aren't always just intuition processing subconscious cues. Sometimes they're information being transmitted from consciousness that exists beyond the physical. That sudden certainty about something you couldn't possibly know. That's not random. That's not wishful thinking. That's signal 3. The afterlife, communicating through direct transmission of knowledge, proving that consciousness shares a field that transcends individual brains, that survives physical death. I must tell you about the Bollingen Tower, the stone sanctuary I built with my own hands on the shore of Lake Zurich. I designed it as a place of solitude, of reflection, of connection with the deepest layers of psyche. But from the moment I began construction, I felt them, the presences, not frightening, not threatening, but undeniably there. I would work alone, carving stone, and feel someone watching. I would turn, expecting to see a visitor, and find only empty space. But the presence remained. Sometimes I could identify who it was, my mother, my father, patients who had died. Sometimes it was older, ancestral, connected to the land itself or to the collective history of human consciousness. One evening in 1928, I was reading in the tower when the air changed, became thicker, charged, almost visible. I felt a presence so strong that I spoke aloud. "Who are you?" I asked the empty room, and I received an answer, not in words, but in direct psychic impression, a sense of identity, of purpose, of message. A deceased patient whose case I'd never fully understood was showing me what I'd missed, giving me insight I needed for current work. This wasn't imagination. The information I received that evening proved accurate when I researched the patient's family history weeks later. The presence had communicated real information I didn't consciously possess. Throughout my career, I worked with hundreds of people experiencing similar phenomena. A widow who felt her husband sitting in his favorite chair every evening at 6 p.m. A man whose deceased sister's perfume would suddenly fill rooms she'd never entered in life. A family whose dead son's presence was so strong in their home that visitors would ask who the young man in the upstairs room was, though no living person occupied it. The materialist explanation: these are grief hallucinations, psychological projections, environmental stimuli misinterpreted. But I studied these cases too carefully, documented them too thoroughly, experienced them too personally to accept such dismissive explanations. The presences people feel are real, not physical bodies, but psychic presences, consciousness that exists without flesh, visiting places and people they remain connected to. The afterlife isn't somewhere else, it's here, occupying the same space as physical reality, but at a different frequency, a different dimension of existence. The dead haven't gone away, they've shifted state. And sometimes the veil between states becomes thin enough that their presence bleeds through into perceivable reality. If you felt someone who died standing beside you, watching you, accompanying you through your life, you weren't crazy. The afterlife was making its presence known, proving that consciousness remains active, aware, capable of focused attention, even without a physical body. Now I must tell you about the most profound signal, the one that changed my entire understanding of death and consciousness. In February 1944, I suffered a severe heart attack. I was expected to die, and for a brief time, I believe I did die, or came so close that the boundary dissolved completely. What I experienced during that time, near death, cannot be adequately described in language, but I must try, because it's the most important signal of all. I left my body. I rose above the earth and saw it from space, a glowing sphere surrounded by darkness. Then I moved towards something I can only describe as a temple made of light, a structure that seemed to contain all meaning, all purpose, all answers. As I approached this temple, I encountered presences, not individual deceased people, but archetypal forms. The wise old man, the great mother, the divine child. The figures that appear in myths, religions, dreams across all cultures and all times. They weren't symbols, they were real, more real than physical reality. They were the templates, the patterns, the eternal forms that physical life imperfectly manifests. In their presence, I understood. Death isn't ending, it's return. Return to the archetypal realm, to the dimension of eternal patterns, to the source of all consciousness. We come from there into physical life, we return there when physical life completes. The afterlife isn't heaven in clouds, it's the collective unconscious made conscious, the dimension of psyche, where all patterns exist, where all consciousness originates and returns. But before I could enter the temple, before I could complete the transition, I was pulled back. I had work remaining. My doctor, the same Dr. H who visited me at his death, appeared and told me I couldn't stay yet. I raged at being returned to the body, to the limitations, to the pain, but I came back. The archetypal encounter isn't rare. It happens to everyone who approaches death consciously. Near-death experiencers report meeting beings of light who are archetypal forms, not personal ancestors. People in deep meditation encounter these same eternal patterns. Psychedelic explorers describe identical archetypal presences. These encounters are the most profound communication from the afterlife. When you encounter archetypal energies, whether in dreams, in meditation, in crisis, in near-death states, you're touching the dimension of consciousness that survives death. You're making contact with the eternal patterns that existed before your birth and will exist after your death. You're proving to yourself that consciousness is far vaster, far older, far more eternal than your individual identity. The afterlife isn't waiting for you in some distant future. It's the background of all existence, the source you emerged from, the destination you return to. And sometimes through practices, through crisis, through openness, you can contact it while still alive, receive its signals, know its reality. I spent years documenting these 5 signals because they prove what materialist science desperately wants to deny. Consciousness is not produced by the brain. Consciousness uses the brain, inhabits the body, operates through physical form, but it originates elsewhere, in the collective unconscious, in the archetypal realm, in what religions call the afterlife and the psychoid dimension, where psyche and matter unite. Every synchronistic death announcement proves consciousness operates beyond spatial limitations. Every recurring dead dream visitor proves consciousness survives bodily death. Every impossible knowing proves consciousness shares a collective field. Every haunting presence proves consciousness can exist without physical form. Every archetypal encounter proves consciousness returns to eternal patterns. These aren't supernatural phenomena. They're natural functions of psyche operating at its full capacity, unbound by the limitations of ego, unconfined to individual brain, participating in the collective field that connects all consciousness across time and death. The afterlife is calling you constantly, but most people never answer because they've been trained to dismiss the signals as impossible. Your rational mind, your scientific education, your cultural conditioning, they all tell you these experiences aren't real. So when they happen, you explain them away, ignore them, forget them. But I'm telling you, after thousands of documented cases, after my own direct experiences, the signals are real. The afterlife is reaching out. Your deceased loved ones are visiting. Information is being transmitted. Presences are making themselves known. The archetypal realm is available for contact. To receive these signals clearly, you must do what I did. Keep a journal. Write down every strange knowing, every unusual dream, every sense of presence, every synchronistic occurrence. Don't dismiss them. Document them. You'll begin to see patterns, frequencies, undeniable evidence that communication is occurring. Meditate regularly. In silence, the ego's skepticism quiets, allowing psyche to perceive what's always been there. I spent hours every day in meditation and active imagination, creating space for the unconscious to speak, for the archetypal realm to break through. Honor your dreams. Keep a dream journal beside your bed. Write immediately upon waking. The visitation dreams will reveal themselves through their distinctive quality. You'll know them when you see them documented in writing. They're different. Trust your impossible knowing. When information arrives in your consciousness without logical source, don't dismiss it as random thought. Test it. Act on it. You'll discover it's accurate far more often than chance would allow. Create sacred space. The dead are drawn to places prepared for them, not through ritual magic, but through intentional consciousness. Set aside space in your home, in your schedule, in your awareness for contact with the dimensions beyond physical reality. Here's what the afterlife signals have taught me. Years of research and personal experience have proven beyond doubt. Death is not ending, it's transformation. The ego dies, yes. The body dies, absolutely. But consciousness, the psyche, the essential self that observes through the ego, that uses the body, that exists as a node in the collective field, that continues, it returns to the archetypal realm, to the dimension of eternal patterns, to what religions call heaven or the afterlife or the spirit world. But it's not somewhere else. It's the depth dimension of reality, always present, always accessible, existing right here but at a frequency most people can't perceive, while identified with ego and body. Your deceased loved ones haven't gone anywhere. They've shifted state. They're still present, still aware, still connected to you through the collective unconscious, still able to communicate through dreams, through synchronicity, through presence, through direct knowing, through archetypal encounter. If you've experienced any of these 5 signals, you have a responsibility. not to convince skeptics, not to prove anything to science, but to yourself, to honor what you've experienced, to acknowledge what you know, to remain open to further contact. The afterlife is calling you because you're meant to answer, because you have the capacity to perceive what others miss, because your consciousness is developed enough to receive what the veil is transmitting. And remember, the 5 signals the afterlife is calling with aren't rare miracles. They're common experiences that prove consciousness transcends death, that the dead remain connected to the living, that the afterlife isn't future destination, but present dimension. You are not a body that has a soul. You are a soul that has a body. And when the body ends, you don't end. You return to the collective unconscious, to the archetypal realm, to the source you emerged from and never truly left. The signals prove it, the synchronicities announce it, the dreams demonstrate it, the knowing transmits it, the presences manifest it, the archetypes embody it. Death is not ending, it's awakening, not loss but liberation, not separation but return. And the afterlife isn't calling you to frighten you about mortality, it's calling you to remind you of immortality. You are eternal, you always have been, you always will be, and the signals you're receiving prove it. Every strange knowing, every vivid dream, every sense presence, every synchronicity, every archetypal encounter, they're not coincidences, they're not imagination, they're proof, evidence, communication from the dimension that existed before your birth and will embrace you after your death. The afterlife is calling. It's been calling your entire life. And now, finally, you know what to listen for. The 5 unmistakable signals that consciousness transcends death, that love survives the grave, that the veil between worlds is permeable. Answer the call, trust the signals, know the truth. We continue, always. That's what the afterlife is calling to tell you. And these 5 signals are its proof.